Okay, hi Bukelwa. We've been trying to do this call for quite some time now, but I'm calling you from Stockholm, Sweden. Where are you?
I am currently in Johannesburg, South Africa.
So, am I disturbing you in the middle of your lunch?
No, it's fine.
Okay, good. So you work with like climate and energy issues in South Africa and Africa in general. What would you say is the most prominent climate issue in South Africa at the moment?
When we speaking of issues, especially the key issues in South Africa, there's a vast number of them. Really, from food security to droughts and floods and extreme events being a key issue. But a lot of our work or campaigning work that we do is really addressing the issue of fossil fuels, because our energy sector or electricity system in South Africa is still heavily dependent on the use of fossil fuels, which you all know are a driver of global warming, particularly the climate crisis that we're finding ourselves in today. So really, it's trying to engage with not only our governments to hold them accountable, and saying, here's an issue and this is the root cause of the issue. We also want to bring attention to the drivers of this problem, which are fossil fuel-based industries, like our state electricity provider, which is Eskom, for example, accounts for about 40% of our emissions as a nation and as a country. And because of that, it's not only from a CO2 or carbon dioxide emitting perspective, but also it's a driver of pollution in the country. A lot of the coal-fired power stations that are owned by by Eskom, for example, are located in Mpumalanga, which is a province in South Africa. And as much as air pollution we know is a global issue, it's also a national issue. But you can imagine just how the communities in those areas and the minefields are impacted. I think firstly, the biggest challenge for us here is to sensitize people. We all know that, I mean, when we speak about climate change or the climate crisis, it's an easy word to understand for most people, especially if like your home language is English or it's a second language. In Africa or in South Africa, you know, it's still terms that are so far removed from people's realities, right? So you sort of have to break these things down. And oftentimes, I mean, I know that air pollution sometimes can be separated from the climate crisis, but we can't move away from the fact that fossil fuel dependencies, they drive the climate crisis, but also it's an air pollution problem. And right now the focus is on sensitizing people and actually making them aware, because a lot of it is not seen. When you step outside in South Africa, it's not like in India where in Delhi, for example, you know, there's smog and there's pollution that people see. In Johannesburg, you look outside now, the skies are blue. So getting people to recognize that, I mean, you mentioned a nice, a fact that in India, there's stats around, you know, the number of children that are dying a day. I think last year we got the stats from, I think it was the World Health Organization, that 9 out of 10 people in South Africa breathe polluted air. So regardless of whether you are in Mpumalanga, the province that I mentioned, where people can actually see the plumes of air pollution, even in metros and in cities like Johannesburg, where we don't necessarily see it, the scary truth is that 9 out of 10 people are still breathing polluted air, which shouldn't be the case.
That's horrible. And what's Greenpeace's solution to this? Is there any way that South Africa can also move away from the fossil fuel dependency?
There's definitely a way. One of the key challenges that we're recognizing now is there's a lack of political will to, one, come up with policies that are really going to shift us away from dependency on fossil fuel.
And why is
where we're exploring renewable energy, for example. So those are just some of the limits that we're recognizing. And so in holding our presidents and government officials accountable in saying that, yes, you do have nationally determined contributions, which is saying that we want to reduce our carbon emissions by this much. There need to be policies in place so that companies like Eskom and Sasol, for example, are held to account, not only for their carbon emissions, but also for the pollution that is, that people are subjected to. So it's two parts. There's a sensitization and an awareness element to it, in saying that you have a right to clean air. You've got a right to demand it. You've got a right to hold the people who are causing the pollution accountable. But secondly, saying our government has basically rectified or agreed to a lot of the international, standards and commitments, like the Paris Agreement, for example. However, seeing that actualized and that becoming concrete and translating into our national and our provincial policies, we haven't seen that take place. And we want to hold them accountable to that, because everybody has a right to clean air.
You're really putting the finger on something extremely important here, right? Like highlighting that we have countries all over the world who have signed up for the Paris Agreement, and they know the same amount of science that we know, right? They know what coal is doing to global warming. They know what it does to air pollution, etc. But you're saying there's a lack of political will. Why is that lack of political will existing if they know the same science that we do?
Yeah, and you couldn't be more correct. The science is clear. The science is crystal clear at this point. And I mean, there are papers upon papers that are proving that, the fossil fuel industry is a driver to a lot of the climate crisis that we're finding ourselves in. And in South Africa, the honest truth is that there are vested interests. There is still companies that are lobbying and ensuring that, there are these artificial limits that are placed. I mean, the fact that there's still so much red tape around a company or a household wanting to put up rooftop solar means that there are these barriers that are being put in place to actually hinder and prevent the future that is ahead of us. So a lot of the reasons why our politicians are not being bold and brave, which is what we need right now, really, is largely because of the vested interest and the fact that even as citizens, we don't feel empowered enough to say, government, this is what the science is saying, this is what you've agreed to, now we want to see the actions. I mean, I think I'd say lucky that I live in a city right now, but I still go home to my parents who live in a village in rural KZN, and seeing just how extreme events are becoming more and more frequent in their areas. And because, I mean, South Africa is still a developing country in a lot of areas. A lot of people are still located in these rural areas where there's minimal infrastructure. There are issues of poverty and unemployment. And we all know that the climate crisis is a multiplier of those issues already. I think one of the most devastating things really that made me feel a little bit more passionate than I thought I was going back home one December and seeing an area where there used to be homes and households literally barren, because that area is now, cleared because it's a floodplain. And how that happened is that people's houses were actually washed away and people died one December because it's coming at us, like the climate crisis and the impacts and the weather events are coming at us at paces or even frequencies that we'd never ever imagined before. And actually seeing people's lives being impacted, people that I know and families that I know that my parents are connected to, it turned it from, yes, it is a global issue, but it became more of a personal issue for me, and actually connecting it to real lives and real people in my immediate space.
That's such a horrible thing to hear. Like in Sweden, for example, we have politicians that they know the exact same science as we do. Still, our state is investing money into fossil fuels, and like our Swedish pension funds are investing in huge fossil fuel companies, which is absurd because they're like, those are money for my future, right?
Yeah.
And it's insane. But yeah, it's also good to hear that if we're making a difference here, it will also affect the rest of the world. And that's like the fossil fuel industry is very connected, and they are dependent on seeing that, oh, we can have an industry up in the global north, we can also have it in the global south. But if it doesn't work in one country, why would it work in another country, right?
Yeah. And you make mention of the Fridays for Futures movement, for example. And for me, as somebody who's been working in the climate change space in South Africa, the fact that it was put on the map, I mean, this was last year, not 2018 in September. There was a significant shift, the fact that for the very first time, African youth felt like they had a space, they had a voice, because of them just being inspired by seeing another youngster who's passionate about their future. And the youth movement for us really has brought in refreshing conversations in a global South perspective, where youth for the longest time had been ignored. But they've actually highlighted that this is us wanting to fight for a future that you haven't taken the right decisions to preserve. Yeah. So you're very right. It's a global space. It's interconnected, and sometimes a win in the global north, no matter how small it might seem, it triggers a ripple effect of wins that will trickle down, and then we'll see a change somewhere down the line.
Yeah, and vice versa, very much. Yeah, I think that's so inspiring, and just remembering that was a youth movement. Imagine if we all did those kind of shifts and all those kind of change. Imagine what effect that could have on the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Very inspiring, and I'm so grateful that you took your time to call from South Africa, Johannesburg, during lunch hours as well. And I'm gonna add, could you just say like how people that wants to follow the work of Greenpeace Africa, where can they look into do that?
So Greenpeace Africa has a number of offices or bases around Africa, and to really just follow the specifics of our work and the different focus areas. We are on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook at Greenpeace Africa for all three. And also a lot of it can be accessed off our websites, which is greenpeaceafrica.org.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much, Bukelwa, and I'll hope to talk more to you in the future.
Sure. Thank you so much. And you have yourself a great day further.
Thank you.
Sure. Bye.